Faith. What is it? Being sure of our hope. Convinced of what we can't see. By faith, we understand the world was set in order at God's command. By faith, Abel offered God a greater sacrifice than Cain, and for his faith, God commended him as righteous. By faith, Noah trusted God and constructed an ark for the deliverance of his family. By faith, Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, believing God would still fulfill his promises. By faith, Moses chose to be mistreated with the people of God, rather than enjoy sin's fleeting pleasure. By faith, God's chosen nation crossed the Red Sea on dry ground and praised him as it swallowed up the Egyptians. By faith, Rahab the prostitute escaped destruction because she welcomed the spies in peace. Time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, David, and the prophets. By faith, they administered justice, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire. But others were imprisoned, murdered, and wandered in deserts, mountains, and openings in the earth. We are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. So get rid of every weight, of every sin, and run with endurance the race set before us. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. He is the champion and guide of our faith. For promised joy, he endured the cross, thought nothing of its shame, and having risen again, has been handed his deserved glory at the right hand of the throne of God.
Good morning to my friends and my family all across the city of Jacksonville and the San Jose Church, and anybody who might be tuning in from very far off. We still consider you friends and family. And so I want to say good morning, but I also want to say Happy Easter. This is Easter, and Easter is a big deal. Now I know that we can't celebrate it the way that we want to today. And I know that all of us want to be here together. We all want to be worshiping together, and we can't do it that way today. But I do want to say that Easter is a big deal. And I think there's going to be a tendency to kind of minimize Easter this year. Because, you don't need your Easter dresses and outfits, and you may not need, the massive Easter egg hunts. I still think it's so important to make Easter a big deal, because this is the one day. This is the one day that we celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and all that that means for our life. And so I want to encourage you as a family today, find a way to make a big deal out of Easter. And I also want to encourage you to find some time just with you and God, just some time where you're able to pray to him and express your thanks for all that he has done in your life. Over the last few weeks, I've been, calling around to some friends and some family members and some of our church family, and I've been wanting to find out how people are doing. And I want you to know that everybody is doing just fine. Everybody is doing well. They have enough. They have enough to eat. They are making it just fine. But I get the sense that a lot of people are just sort of weary of everything that's going on. And people are sort of weighed down by all of the worries about these things and all of the worries about what could happen. And I also get the sense that people are just sort of worn out. And what might have been kind of an initial adrenaline rush to us about, okay, how to deal with this, and we've got to get active right away, and we want to respond, to others in a Christ-like fashion. Sometimes the adrenaline wears off, and we can get sort of worn out. So one of the things that happens is, okay, well, we're not able to go out and get encouragement from social gatherings with other people, and so people are feeling a little tired of that. People don't have these big events to look forward to. And some people are turning on the news on a regular basis, and then you see all of this bad news sort of flooding in. And some of us are extroverts, and some of us need our social interaction. And if we don't get that, then we begin to feel a little down and depressed and just weary with life. And so I want to say that I know that this happens. I know this may be happening in your life. You may be going through this, and this is part of what we want to talk about today. This is part of why maybe it's a good time for Easter, because we need more joy and encouragement and to be uplifted, maybe more now than in many, many Easters past. And I noticed it this week just with my own kids and my own family. Right now, my wife and I are kind of trading off shifts. We're working weird hours and late hours and early mornings, and it is very exhausting and tiring. And so one day this week, I was tired, and both of my kids, I think, were just going stir crazy. And so it was about 10 a.m., and both of them had meltdowns before 10 a.m., and you know that that's not a great setup for the day. And so I was trying to think to myself, okay, what can we do? What can we do in order to just make some celebration for the day and add some joy to the day? And so, of course, what am I going to say? I said, let's go get some ice cream. Let's go get some ice cream and let's have some fun, and let's make this a good day and not a meltdown sort of day. And so we hopped in the car, we drove through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru, we got some milkshakes. We sat in the car and we drank those milkshakes, and the kids for maybe about 45 minutes were just excited and happy and doing well. And then the rest of the day, kind of went right back to where we started. And it was a very tough day. And so we know that we're worn out, and we know that ice cream isn't going to do it. A little bit of ice cream or a little bit of Easter candy isn't going to sustain us from feeling weary and worn out. But there is something that will, and it is Jesus Christ. It is the death, burial, and especially the resurrection of Jesus Christ will bring so much joy and hope to us, especially in these times. But how can we gain access to that joy? How can we gain access to that hope? And this is what I hope to talk to you a little bit about today. So the question that we're asking right now, the big question on the table, is how do we restore our faith when we are weary, weighed down, and worn out? Since that's maybe how some of us are feeling, how do we restore our faith when we're feeling this way? We just watched this movie right before the sermon about the heroes of faith. And there are so many great heroes of faith that it talks about. And the reason the Hebrew writer starts into Hebrews 11 talking about this great faith is because there are people who have done it. There are people who have endured great trials, great sufferings, have gone through many, many things, and they have kept their faith and not been worn down or worn out by what was going on around them. And so we look at people like David. And when we look at the life of David, it's always amazing to me how many attacks were coming his way. Both physical and emotional and mental attacks that were coming his way constantly. And yet, despite just how draining that can be, he stayed faithful to God. He developed great trust in God in those times. And we look at people like Abraham, who had such tremendous faith that he could even believe that God would get him through this time of sacrificing his son. And how did he do that? How did he have faith like that in a time where that may have just worn him out? And we look at people like Moses, who led God's people, so many people through so many difficult circumstances and all of their complaining and all of their rebellion. How did Moses do that? How did he have such great faith? And there are so many others that we could talk about, but so many people got through their difficult time and they made it. They made it. And so there are incredible heroes of faith. And the Hebrew writer is writing all of this to get us to chapter 12 so that he can tell us how we can get through our difficult circumstances with great faith. And so we want to look at this a little bit more. In Hebrews chapter 12, we're going to start in verse 1. It says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And so he starts out and he says, we were surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. This is what he's saying. These people did it. Now they're watching you, and be encouraged that they got through their struggles and you can get through yours too. And then he says this, he says, let us throw off everything that hinders. What he's sort of saying here is there are moments when the race gets tough, when it gets difficult to keep going. And these are the moments where we need to especially kind of buckle down and get ready and push through these obstacles that are coming. These are the moments where you take this race seriously. And I don't know if you've ever run long distances. I have run semi-long distances. But there's this moment where you just want to quit. You want to give up. You don't want to keep running. You just want to lay down on the pavement and just sort of collapse because of how hard it is in these moments. And he's saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Instead, what you need to do is keep going. Throw off the things that hinder you. Throw off the obstacles. Throw off the sin that so easily entangles. And let us keep running. Let's take the race seriously and run with perseverance, this race that God has marked out for us. And then we get to kind of the secret of running with endurance. It's no surprise that Jesus just has so many things to teach us and show us, but he has the secret for running with endurance and running races of great trials. In verse 2, the Hebrew writer says this, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so the first thing I want us to see is that what he is saying here is the first thing you need to do is fix your eyes on Jesus. You need to look at him because he has the answer for you. And so he's wanting us to discover what answer Jesus has for us. And so I want us first to see that he endured the cross, scorning its shame. Jesus went through great opposition, and especially on the cross. We have read these stories. We know what he went through, and there was such great pain and obstacles that he went through on the cross. And then it says, this is a fascinating choice of words, that he scorned the shame of the cross. What does that mean? What does that mean to scorn the shame of the cross? It means essentially that he didn't look at it. He wasn't bothered by it. And in fact, when he walked by the shame of the cross that could be distracting, that could be detrimental to the race that he was running, he sort of spit on it and said, no, I'm not going to even look at you. I'm not going to even touch you. I'm not going to even consider you. Shame, be gone. So he kind of just told it off. And he kind of keeps going. And how does he do that? How is he able to do that? For the joy that is set before him. And so what Jesus does is there is great pain and there's great suffering and there's great trial that he's enduring. But he doesn't look at that. He doesn't focus on it. He doesn't say, oh, poor me, this is what I'm going through. This is how difficult this time is. This is how much this hurt or that hurt. Instead, he moves his eyes past the trials, past the pain, past the suffering, on to the joy that is set before him. And he fixes his eyes on that and doesn't ever let the suffering get in the way of what he is trying to accomplish. And so I would say this is that Jesus explored every inch of joy beyond every ounce of suffering. He explored every inch of joy, looking past every ounce of suffering that was in front of him. Now, how does he do this? Especially with the cross. Because what's set before him? I mean, what do we think about to set before him? I think about the floggings that he went through. That is what was set before him. I think about the nails that were driven into his hands, and that is what was set before him. I think about how they placed him on the cross, and he felt the weight of those nails in his hands and in his feet, and that is what was set before him. I think about the crowd as they yelled and screamed and made fun of him on the cross and asked him to save himself because he saved others. I think about that being set before him. I think about how they divided lots for his clothing. And all of this pain and anguish and suffering and ridicule, how in the world did Jesus know all of that was going to happen, see all of that in front of him, and yet not look at it, but instead look at the joy that was set before him? I think the answer is maybe simple. It's simple to say, it's much harder to do. But the answer is this, is that his joy overshadowed his suffering. That his joy overshadowed his suffering. So it didn't really matter how big the suffering got, how big the weariness got, how big just the weight of everything that he was carrying on our sins. It didn't really matter how big everything else got, because his joy, the joy that would be set before him, was always bigger than the suffering. It was always bigger than the trial. And so how did he get through the cross? He had greater joy than he had trials. In fact, we see how this unfolds in John chapter 12, verse 27 and 28. He says, this is on his road to the cross. It is before he is going to the cross. And he says, now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice from heaven came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And so we can see right off the bat that he's troubled, that he is feeling all of the weight of our sin and all of the weight of the road that lies ahead. And he says, what shall I do? What shall I say in this moment? Shall I say, save me from this hour? Shall I say, take it all away from me? No, he doesn't pray that at all. Instead, he says, no, this is the very reason that I came. It's the very reason that I'm here. It is not just for me to not have trials and sufferings, but so that I can glorify God in everything that I do, so that I can experience the joy of glorifying you, God. That is more important than anything else at this time. And so this is the question, one of those questions I have to chew on a little bit, is what was the joy set before him? Because it could be so many things. I mean, is the joy set before him the fact that he's going back up to heaven to be with the Father? And I think, yeah, that's part of the joy that's set before him. Is the joy set before him the fact that he kind of kicks Satan in the teeth and says, you're not going to have any control over my people anymore? I think, yes, that's part of the joy set before him. Is the joy set before him the fact that his sacrifice on the cross forgives our sin? Yeah, I think that's part of it. Is the joy set before him the fact that his resurrection conquers death? Yeah, I think that's part of the joy that is set before him. But ultimately, Jesus was already in heaven. He was already in heaven. He was already with God. And so why go through everything that he went through if the joy set before him is just to be back with God? See, that's why I think the joy that is set before him is that we, you and me, get to be together with God and with Jesus forever. I think that is the joy that is set before him, or at least part of it, is that imagining while he's on the cross, all of the people who had sin in their life, all of the people that were trapped by death, all of the people who had no hope. And for the joy set before him that they could have new life, he endured the cross, not looking at the shame of the cross because it was so much smaller than the joy of the cross, than the joy of the resurrection. And so I think part of the joy set before him is you. Part of the joy that's set before him is me. That you and I could have this relationship with God, not marred by our sin, not marred by our guilt, not marred by the mistakes that we've made in the past. But that we could have a relationship with God that is right, that is pure, that is clean, that is amazing, that is beautiful, and that will last forever. This is the joy that was set before Jesus. And so when he is on the cross, imagining all of the things that he is imagining, I think he imagines the empty tomb. And maybe he imagines the women and Mary as they come to prepare his body, and they find it gone. And they realize for the first time that Jesus is risen, and that is the part of the joy that's set before him. And I think that he imagines the disciples and the fact that they can't quite bend their mind around this idea that his death somehow takes away their sin and gives them the hope of heaven. I think that he imagines Thomas and this person that is so filled with doubt, just like we are sometimes. So filled with doubt. And yet Jesus is able to show him that he is God. I think that he imagines what it was like to appear back to the disciples and to give them such hope that there is a God and he is living and he is among them. I think that he imagines the disciples on the day before he ascends into heaven, and he is saying to them, this is the hope that you are to carry to the rest of the world. That there is hope and there is joy for every single person under the sun. And this is the joy that is set before Jesus. And we are to consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that we don't grow weary, and so that we don't lose heart. It is so easy to grow weary and lose heart, but when we consider the joy set before Jesus, then we also have to consider the joy set before us. And see, great joy, the great joy that we have because of the resurrection, it exists beyond your current trials. And so whatever struggles you have, whatever difficulties you're going through, whatever trials that you're facing, the joy that God has given to you, the truth that God has given to you that you can live with him forever in peace and good relationship with him, is so much bigger, is so much better, is so much more just filled with excitement than any trial that you are facing right now. But sometimes we lose sight of that. Sometimes we lose sight of that great joy that he has given us. And so this is what I want to challenge us with, is to explore every inch of joy beyond every ounce of your trials. Explore every inch of joy that he has given us beyond every inch of the trials that you are facing. And I can tell you that what comes back is your motivation. What comes back is your prayer life. What comes back is your excitement to talk to God and to worship God and to study your scripture and to then go be a light to the world. And so the way that we have faith, the way that we grow our faith during times of trials, is we explore every inch of joy. We get specific about it. I think one of the problems that we have is that we don't, our imaginations when it comes to God and when it comes to heaven and when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to the great things that he has prepared for us, our imaginations are just too small. And sometimes I feel like we don't really spend that much time thinking about all that he has given us and kind of detailing it in our minds. Let me give you a quick example. My dad and I were planning on hiking the Grand Canyon at the end of April. And like everything else, it seems it also was canceled. My dad is 68 years old, and it's always been on his sort of bucket list to hike the Grand Canyon. And so I said, Dad, we probably should do this before both of us are too old to do it. And so we sent away for the permit, and we got it back and a few months later, and we got approved to hike the Grand Canyon. And there was this moment of excitement about hiking the Grand Canyon. Then there was this realization of like, oh, we actually are going to have to hike it. And so we should probably get some gear and we should probably train for this event. And how in the world do you train for the Grand Canyon when you live in Florida? How do you do that? And so I thought about it and I thought, the only way I'm going to be able to do this is to train for it on something we used to call, at least in the 90s, the Stairmaster. And the Stairmaster is one of those machines that looks like it was designed to torture people. I mean, if you've ever been to a gym, you know the section that I'm talking about. You walk by it and you look at the people on it, and it looks like, they're suffering. I mean, sometimes I feel like when I walk by, I should have my cell phone out ready to dial 911 in case one of them doesn't make it. I mean, some of them are just grabbed onto the rails and they're kind of like bowing their head, and some of them are even resting their head on the Stairmaster machine. And so because of this, before this year, I've never touched a Stairmaster, never. And I promised myself I was never going to do it because it looks like such torture. Yet, because we planned to hike the Grand Canyon, I thought, I'm going to have to get on the Stairmaster. And so I just did 5 minutes the first time, and that was hard enough. And every time I went to the gym, I would add another 2.5 minutes until the time that I got to about 25 minutes on the Stairmaster. And in 25 minutes, I can climb somewhere around 85 or 90 flights of stairs. And it is exhausting, and it is torturous. Now, how in the world did I motivate myself to get on one of those machines after I promised myself I would never touch one of those? How in the world do you get motivation for something like that? Well, rather than focusing on the suffering, and there was lots of it, rather than focusing on all of the hurt that my body was going through, I started to think about the Grand Canyon. And I started to think about what it would be like to hike the Grand Canyon, and the kind of vistas I would see and the views that I would have as I would hike the Grand Canyon. I would picture them and imagine them. I would imagine my dad and I kind of walking down the trail and laughing and having a good time on the way down to the bottom. I would imagine that on the way down because I knew that on the way back up we would not be having a good time at all. And I would imagine, the peaceful river and the peaceful, quiet experience that we would have on the way down, and what joy that would be. And I would imagine, sleeping underneath the stars and the conversations that we would have, and just the joy that would come from sharing those things. And then I would just imagine the bonding time that I would have with my dad, and just the great experience it would be to do something on his bucket list with him. And the joy of all of those things allowed me to go through the suffering on that Stairmaster machine. And I think it's very similar to how we get through the trials that we are going through right now. Because God's joy, in all of its splendor and detail, pulls us through great trials, if we can just imagine it. God's joy, the joy and the great things that he has planned for us, is so great that it should be able to pull you through no matter what circumstances you're going through. But we have to imagine it. We have to get lost in the details of what it looks like. And we're not very good about this. We're not very good at imagining what heaven is like. And so rather than just thinking about some place that you'll go to later, to have the joy that is set before us, get us through trials, we need to imagine it. And so I want you to imagine what it would be like to arrive in heaven, what that feeling would be like. What would you see? What would you experience? What feeling would you have when you first arrived in heaven? What would it be like to sit down and to have a conversation with God about anything? The one who made you, the one who created you, what would that be like? What would it be like to sing praises to God in heaven? I mean, with people singing, but with every creature that God has invited into that place, singing and worshiping him with all of their hearts, uninhibited by our weaknesses. What would that be like? What would it be like to talk to other people and to talk about God, being able to see him in his full glory and full majesty? What would that be like? What would it be like to have this peace that is unmixed by any other feeling. I mean, when you think about that, and you think about all that God has prepared for us, there is no reason to be weary. There is no reason to be burdened. There's no reason to be weighed down, because the joy that he has given us certainly overshadows any trials that we are going